They thought they could block my family's century-old campground entrance with a chain and a smirk until I showed them the deed that made their entire luxury resort my tenant. Picture this. It's 6 a.m. and I'm standing in my work boots watching this pharmaceutical heiress in a $3,000 pantsuit click a padlock shut on the gate my grandfather built with his bare hands. Cordelia Whitmore, yeah, that's her real name, is actually humming while she steals 70 years of family history. The metal chain rattles against the old wood posts like some twisted funeral bell. She turns to me with this satisfied little smile and says, "Nothing personal, Mr. Blackwood. Wrong move, lady, dead wrong. See, sometimes the quiet guy with dirt under his fingernails knows exactly what nuclear option he's been sitting on for 3 generations. What would you do if some entitled HOA queen tried to padlock your family's legacy? And where are you watching from? Because I guarantee your neighborhood has at least one Cordelia." Let me back up and tell you how we got here, because this story starts with a stubborn old man, a handshake deal, and the kind of foresight that would make Cordelia Whitmore's lawyers weep into their overpriced coffee. My name's Ezra Blackwood, and I'm the 3rd generation to run Pine Ridge Family Campground in the mountains of North Carolina. My grandfather bought 847 acres back in 1952 for $12,000. Pocket change now, but serious money back when a new Chevy cost $1,500. The old man had this saying, "Son, when you buy land, buy everything under it, over it, and around it." Smart words that would save my ass 70 years later. This place isn't just dirt and trees. We've got pristine lake frontage where the water's so clear you can count the bass swimming 20 feet down, old-growth forest that makes grown men whisper like they're in church, and something most folks never think about, mineral rights stretching 2 miles in every direction. Grandpa was thorough like that. Dad ran this campground for 40 years like it was his personal mission to prove heaven exists. Every summer brought the same families back, kids who caught their first fish here, parents who remembered what their own voices sounded like without traffic noise. When Dad had his stroke in 2019, I didn't just inherit property. I inherited the sound of children's laughter echoing off the water and the responsibility to keep that magic alive. This place is everything to me and my 17-year-old daughter Maya. It's where I proposed to Sarah 15 years ago under that old oak that leans over the dock like it's trying to touch the moon. Sarah fought cancer with more courage than I showed in Desert Storm, and when she lost that battle 3 years ago, we buried her next to my great-grandfather who died building these cabins with his bare hands. Maya wants to study environmental science, and this land is her living classroom. But let's talk reality. Keeping 847 acres running costs serious money. Property taxes hit us for 18 grand annually, plus maintenance, insurance, and the endless parade of broken septic pumps that always fail at 2 a.m. during peak season. We need every camping fee just to break even. Enter Cordelia Whitmore, pharmaceutical heiress and professional pain in my backside. She showed up in 2018 like a bad rash, buying her way into Lakeside Estates, this shiny new development that sprouted on our lake's north shore. 40 McMansions ranging from $800K to $2 million, complete with a private beach club and enough HOA rules to strangle a politician. Cordelia made her fortune from opioid settlements, which tells you everything about her moral compass. Spring 2023, she graced my humble campground with her presence. Picture this. Me pouring coffee while she perches on our weathered picnic table like a praying mantis in Prada. The wood smoke from our evening campfire mixed with her suffocating perfume. Imagine vanilla trying to murder pine trees. Her manicured nails drummed against the ceramic mug while she explained my situation with the patience of a kindergarten teacher addressing a slow child. Our Friday night campfires were apparently creating atmospheric disturbances for her precious residents. The families who'd been coming here since before she was born were suddenly demographic challenges threatening their curated lifestyle experience. She actually said curated lifestyle experience with a straight face, like she was arranging a museum exhibit instead of trying to destroy a family business. "Mr. Blackwood," she purred, "I believe it would benefit everyone if you transitioned away from commercial operations by Labor Day. This type of establishment simply doesn't align with our community standards." I tried diplomacy, offered to discuss legitimate concerns, maybe adjust quiet hours, work together on lake conservation. You know what she said? "How charming. We'll see about that, Mr. Blackwood." The gravel crunched under her BMW like broken bones as she drove away. But that sound wasn't half as threatening as her smile. I should have recognized that look. It's the same expression cats get right before they kill something small and helpless. What I didn't know yet was that Cordelia wasn't planning to be a difficult neighbor. She was planning to own everything I loved, and she'd already started the paperwork. October 2023 rolled around, and Cordelia decided to show me what "we'll see about that" actually meant. Turns out, when you have pharmaceutical money and zero conscience, you can make life incredibly complicated for a small business owner just trying to keep his head above water. She started with what I call the death by 1,000 paper cuts strategy. First came the noise complaints. Apparently our campfires violated county ordinances that didn't actually exist. Then the health department got an anonymous tip about our septic systems. Fire marshal received concerns about our electrical hookups. Each complaint cost me $200 to $500 in response fees, inspection costs, and attorney consultations just to prove what I already knew. We were completely legal. But here's where it got interesting. Cordelia wasn't just filing complaints, she was building a narrative. At the country club, she started spreading stories about how our campground attracted criminal elements and transient populations. She made it sound like we were running some kind of hobo convention instead of hosting families from Charlotte who wanted their kids to see actual stars at night. The woman was methodical, I'll give her that. But she made one crucial mistake. She underestimated a Desert Storm veteran with time on his hands and a daughter who'd inherited her mother's stubborn streak. Maya started researching Cordelia's background for a school project on local business leaders. What she found made my coffee taste like battery acid. Cordelia's pharmaceutical fortune came from opioid settlements. She'd gotten rich off other people's addiction and pain. Meanwhile, her precious lakeside estates had rushed construction, cutting corners on environmental impact studies faster than a teenager avoiding chores. I dug deeper. Turns out their private beach club didn't have proper septic permits. Their stormwater management system was dumping runoff directly into our shared lake, and they'd cleared wetlands without federal authorization. Every violation Cordelia was claiming against us, her own development was actually committing, so I filed my own complaints. Health Department, EPA, county zoning. I gave them a shopping list of lakeside estates violations with photos, water samples, and documentation that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. That's when things got really interesting. The county inspector who came out to investigate, nice guy named Rodriguez, pulled me aside after documenting their illegal runoff. "Mr. Blackwood," he said quietly, "you should know that Mrs. Whitmore donated $50,000 to Commissioner Hayes' re-election campaign last year. The same Commissioner Hayes who'd fast-tracked Lakeside Estates permits in 2018. The same office that was now scrutinizing my family's campground with a microscope while ignoring obvious violations next door. I felt that familiar feeling from my military days. The moment you realize you're not just fighting an enemy, you're fighting a system. Maya found me on the porch that night, chain-smoking Marlboros like they were going out of style, staring at the lake where her mother used to skip stones. "Dad," she said, settling into the old rocking chair Sarah had claimed as her own, "Mom always said when people fight dirty, you don't have to get dirty back. You just have to get smarter. Smart. Right. Time to see how smart Cordelia thought she was." 2 weeks later, she showed up at my campground with what she called a survey crew. 3 guys in hard hats with measuring equipment taking readings along our access road. I watched from the cabin porch as they marked trees and drove stakes into the ground like they were planning a parade route. That's when I walked over and asked to see their permits. "Permits?" The crew chief looked confused. "Lady said this was her property." "Interesting theory," I said, pulling out my phone to record. "Mind if I ask which lady told you that?" 10 minutes later, Cordelia's BMW came flying down the gravel road, spraying rocks like shotgun pellets. She climbed out wearing the kind of smile that makes smart animals run for cover. "Mr. Blackwood, I hope you don't mind. We're just doing some preliminary measurements for a small fence project." "Fence project," I repeated. "On my property." "Well, there seems to be some confusion about property lines." "No confusion here, Mrs. Whitmore. I've got 70 years of survey records that say this is exactly where it's always been." Her smile flickered like a light bulb with loose wiring. "Perhaps we should let our attorneys sort this out." "Perhaps we should." I kept recording as her crew packed up their equipment faster than teenagers cleaning their room. "But next time you want to measure something on my land, bring a warrant or don't bother coming at all." As her BMW disappeared in a cloud of dust and wounded pride, she rolled down the window for one final shot. "Enjoy your little camp while it lasts, Mr. Blackwood. Winter's coming." That night, I called attorney Franklin Morse, the old-timer who'd handled my dad's estate. Time to see what 70 years of family paperwork could tell us about winter. January 2024 brought snow, silence, and Cordelia's next brilliant scheme. Apparently, she'd decided that if she couldn't shut down my campground through bureaucratic harassment, she'd just steal the lake. The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday morning that was cold enough to freeze spit. Cordelia's HOA was claiming exclusive water rights to Pine Lake, backed by some fancy law firm from Charlotte that probably charged more per hour than most people make in a week. They wanted an injunction preventing my campground guests from using their lake, complete with private security guards to patrol the shoreline like we were planning an amphibious invasion. The local newspaper ran their press release word for word. Lakeside Estates HOA takes action to protect pristine watershed from commercial contamination. They made it sound like my campers were dumping nuclear waste instead of teaching kids how to fish. But here's the thing about small-town lawyers. Sometimes the old guys who look like they couldn't program a microwave know more about property law than Harvard graduates in $1,000 suits. Franklin Morse had been practicing law since Nixon was president, and when I showed him Cordelia's water rights claim, he just chuckled and reached for a magnifying glass that probably belonged in a museum. "Son," he said, "let me show you something your grandfather was smart enough to include in that 1952 deed." The original deed language was crystal clear. My family had purchased all water rights, riparian access, and beneficial use thereof to Pine Lake. Not some of the lake, not shared access, all of it. Cordelia's expensive lawyers had missed what any first-year law student should have caught. You can't claim exclusive rights to water that someone else already owns. Here's your first knowledge nugget, folks. In water law, there's a hierarchy of rights, and riparian rights, the rights that come with owning land touching the water, almost always trump later claims. The takeaway? Original deeds beat fancy lawyers every single time. While Franklin prepared our legal response, I started documenting what Cordelia's development had actually done to their pristine watershed. Maya's environmental science club turned into my personal research team, testing water quality at different points around the lake. What we found would make the EPA reach for their filing cabinets. Lakeside Estates construction had altered the natural water flow, created erosion problems, and dumped enough sediment into the lake to build a small island. Their storm drains were channeling runoff from driveways and rooftops directly into the water without any filtration. Meanwhile, their private beach club's septic system was leaching into the groundwater faster than gossip spreads at a church social. The security guards they hired were a joke, mostly retired guys who looked like they'd rather be fishing than playing water police. One of them, a former Marine named Rodriguez, different Rodriguez from the county inspector, pulled me aside during their second week on duty. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, keeping his voice low, "that lady who hired us, she told us to accidentally damage any campground property we found near the water line, told us to make problems for your guests." I handed him my phone number. "Rodriguez, I appreciate your honesty. You ever need work that doesn't involve harassing veterans and their families, give me a call." That's when things got really interesting. Rodriguez started sending me photos of Cordelia's private meetings with county officials, taken from his security post. Apparently, our pharmaceutical princess was planning to invoke eminent domain for public waterfront access, using taxpayer money to steal private property for her friend's benefit. The smell of corruption was stronger than low tide on a hot day. Maya's water quality data showed exactly what I suspected. The lake was cleaner around my campground than anywhere near Lakeside Estates. 70 years of responsible stewardship versus 5 years of rich people playing with bulldozers. Guess which one won? But Cordelia wasn't done escalating. She organized a concerned citizens meeting at the community center, complete with a PowerPoint presentation that would make a used car salesman blush. I showed up with my own folder of evidence and found myself facing 50 hostile faces who'd been fed a steady diet of misinformation. Property values have dropped 12% since this establishment expanded operations, Cordelia announced, clicking through slides of selective statistics. "Funny thing about those numbers," I said from the back of the room. "Property values actually rose 30% after Travel Plus Leisure magazine featured my campground in their Hidden Gems of the South article last year." Her laser pointer started shaking. "We're trying to protect our investment and our children's safety. The only thing unsafe here is your math, Mrs. Whitmore, and your septic system." The room got quiet enough to hear a pin drop, or in this case, the sound of Cordelia's credibility hitting the floor. Her presentation had one fatal flaw. She'd assumed I was just some redneck with a fishing pole instead of a combat veteran with a high school environmental science team and 70 years of immaculate property records. Attorney Morse was already preparing our countersuit when Rodriguez called with intelligence that changed everything. March 2024 arrived like a bad hangover, and Cordelia decided to drop all pretense of civility. If legal harassment and water wars wouldn't work, she'd just physically block my family's livelihood and dare me to do something about it. The morning I found the gate, I was carrying my first cup of coffee and thinking about Maya's college applications. Then I saw it. A shiny new barrier stretched across our access road with a sign that read Private Property, Lakeside Estates, Residents Only. They'd hired a security company to monitor the gate and turn away anyone trying to reach my campground. Cordelia was standing next to her BMW, arms crossed, wearing the kind of smile that makes you understand why some animals eat their young. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood. I hope you don't mind the traffic management improvement." "Traffic management," I repeated, setting my coffee down before I threw it. "On my access road." "Well, our survey shows this road crosses Lakeside Estates property. We're simply protecting our residents' privacy and security." The problem with Cordelia's brilliant plan was that she'd never actually bothered to survey anything. She'd just assumed that because her development was newer and shinier, she could claim whatever she wanted. Big mistake. See, when Franklin Morse heard about the blockade, he didn't just pull out my property records. He commissioned a professional survey that would make a NASA engineer weep with envy. What we discovered was better than Christmas morning. Here's knowledge nugget number 2. Property surveys can reveal easements, rights of way, and boundary discrepancies that completely change ownership disputes. The takeaway? When someone claims you're trespassing, make them prove they actually own what they're protecting. Our survey showed that not only was Cordelia wrong about the access road, she was spectacularly, legally, hilariously wrong. The road had always been on my property. But more importantly, Lakeside Estates' main access road crossed a 50-foot easement that my grandfather had never formally transferred. I could legally block their access anytime I wanted. But the real bombshell came from Maya's research into Cordelia's business background. My daughter had been digging through public records for her senior project on corporate environmental responsibility, and what she found made my military training kick into overdrive. Cordelia wasn't just some pharmaceutical heiress with too much time and money. She was a front for an energy speculation consortium that had been buying up rural properties across 3 counties. Her goal wasn't protecting property values, it was forcing out existing landowners so her partners could extract natural gas through fracking. The county records clerk, an old family friend named Betty who'd known my dad since high school, confirmed what Maya had discovered. "Ezra," she whispered during my visit to research mineral rights, "that woman's been in here 6 times, asking about subsurface ownership around your property. She's got gas company geologists crawling all over the area." That's when the pieces clicked into place. Cordelia's harassment campaign wasn't personal, it was business. She needed my land for her fracking operation, and she thought she could bully a grieving widower into selling cheap. What she didn't know was that my grandfather's 1952 deed included mineral rights within a 2-mile radius. Every acre Cordelia had bought, every luxury home her consortium had built, every gas pocket her geologists had mapped, it all sat on top of minerals that belonged to the Blackwood family. I was holding the deed to her entire operation, and she had no idea. The morning confrontation at the gate was almost anticlimactic. Cordelia showed up with a sheriff's deputy and a locksmith, waving around what she claimed was a court order. The deputy, a decent guy named Williams who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Sir, I need you to step back and let them secure this access point," Williams said apologetically. "Officer, I respect your authority, but that's not a court order," I replied, examining the papers. "It's a preliminary injunction request that hasn't been granted yet." "Don't listen to him," Cordelia snapped. "This is our property." "Ma'am," I said calmly, pulling out my surveyor's report, "I've got 70 years of records that say otherwise." "Officer Williams, would you like to see the professional survey we commissioned last week?" The deputy studied my documentation while Cordelia's face went through more color changes than a mood ring. Her locksmith stood there holding his tools like he was waiting for someone to tell him what planet he was on. "Mrs. Whitmore," Deputy Williams said carefully, "this gentleman appears to have proper documentation showing this road is on his property. I can't help you block access to someone's own land." As her BMW disappeared in a cloud of gravel and wounded pride, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to let Cordelia think she'd won for a while. Sometimes the best strategy is letting your enemy dig their own grave before you hand them the shovel. April 2024 brought spring rain, budding trees, and the kind of legal discovery that makes grown men do victory dances in empty parking lots. Franklin Morse had been burning the midnight oil, diving deeper into county records than a submarine on a secret mission. When he called me into his office that Tuesday morning, he had the look of a man who'd just found buried treasure in his backyard. "Ezra," he said, spreading yellow documents across his desk like a poker player revealing a royal flush. "Sit down before I show you this. You're going to want to be sitting down." The original 1952 deed, the one my grandfather signed with ink that had faded to brown, contained language that most modern lawyers would kill for. Buried in the legal jargon was a clause that read, "including all mineral rights and appurtenances thereof within a radius of 2 miles from the described property boundaries." 2 miles, every direction. "Son," Franklin said, his voice barely containing excitement, "your grandfather didn't just buy a campground. He bought the mineral rights under half the county, including every square inch of lakeside estates." The room started spinning like I'd been hit with a flashbang grenade. Cordelia's entire luxury development, her friends' million-dollar homes, her precious beach club, all of it sat on top of minerals that belonged to my family. But it got better. Maya's research into Cordelia's business empire had uncovered the real story. Whitmore Pharmaceutical Holdings was actually a shell company for Appalachian Energy Consortium, a group of investors buying up rural properties to aggregate mineral rights for fracking operations. Cordelia had been playing a long game, using her pharmaceutical money to purchase properties and force out existing landowners. Her plan was elegant in its cruelty: harass families until they sold cheap, then flip the mineral rights to energy companies for massive profits. She'd already invested $2.3 million in geological surveys, environmental assessments, and preliminary drilling permits. Her consortium partners had committed another $15 million for extraction equipment, assuming they'd have clear mineral rights access within 6 months. There was just one tiny problem with their master plan. They'd built their entire operation on land where the mineral rights belonged to a stubborn campground owner who'd just figured out what they were really after. Here's knowledge nugget number 3. Mineral rights can be severed from surface rights, meaning you can own the land but not what's underneath it, or vice versa. The takeaway? Always check who owns the minerals before you start counting oil money or planning your retirement. I sat in Franklin's office, staring at documents that made my family accidentally wealthy while Cordelia's consortium faced complete financial ruin. The estimated value of mineral extraction over 20 years? $50 to $80 million. My family had been struggling to pay $18,000 in annual property taxes while sitting on a fortune that dwarfed most lottery jackpots. The beautiful irony was that Cordelia had no idea I'd discovered her real agenda. She thought she was still fighting some redneck campground owner over noise complaints and property values. Meanwhile, I was holding the legal documents that could destroy her entire business model. That evening, I walked to Sarah's grave and had a long conversation with a headstone. "Honey," I said, watching the sunset paint the lake gold, "remember how you always said Dad's stories about Grandpa being smarter than he looked? Turns out the old man was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers." The next morning, I started planning exactly how to use this nuclear option. Cordelia wanted to play hardball with a military veteran who'd just inherited the deed to her entire future. Time to show her what hardball actually looked like. You know that feeling when you realize you've been playing poker with someone who thought they were holding all the aces, but you've actually been sitting on a royal flush the entire time? That's exactly where I found myself in late April 2024, and it was time to assemble a team that would make Cordelia's expensive lawyers look like they'd learned law from a cereal box. First recruit, Maya and her environmental science club. These kids had been documenting water quality, soil samples, and wildlife patterns around Pine Lake for months, thinking they were just doing school projects. Turns out they'd been building the foundation for the most comprehensive environmental impact study our county had ever seen. Maya coordinated her team like a general commanding troops. "Dad," she said, spreading test results across our kitchen table, "we've got proof that Lakeside Estates violated EPA wetland protection regulations during construction. They dumped fill dirt into protected marshland and never reported it." Her photographs showed illegal dumping, habitat destruction, and runoff patterns that would make environmental lawyers salivate. The girl had inherited her mother's attention to detail and her grandfather's instinct for documentation. Next up, my veteran buddies from the campground's regular crowd. Rodriguez, the ex-Marine security guard who'd been feeding me intelligence, officially quit Cordelia's company and joined our informal advisory council. These guys had combat experience, investigative skills, and the kind of loyalty you can't buy with pharmaceutical money. Ezra, Rodriguez said during one of our strategy sessions, "I've got photos of every private meeting Cordelia's had with county officials, plus recordings of her admitting to bribing the permit office." Franklin Morse became our legal coordinator, working 18-hour days like he was 30 years younger. The old lawyer was having the time of his life, finally getting to use 7 decades of property law experience against someone who deserved it. "Son," Franklin chuckled, "I've been waiting my entire career for a case this satisfying. David versus Goliath, but David's got nuclear weapons." We needed financial intelligence, so I recruited Charlie Henderson, a retired IRS investigator who'd been bringing his grandkids to our campground for 15 years. Charlie analyzed Cordelia's shell company structure like he was solving a puzzle, tracing money flows that revealed the full scope of her consortium's operations. "Ezra," Charlie said, pointing to a flowchart that looked like a spider web designed by a drunk mathematician, "this woman's been buying properties under 6 different corporate names, using offshore accounts to hide beneficial ownership. That's tax fraud, money laundering, and violation of corporate transparency laws." The research phase kicked into overdrive. Maya's club expanded their environmental study to cover the entire 2-mile radius where my mineral rights applied. They documented contamination, illegal dumping, and habitat destruction that painted lakeside estates as an environmental disaster masquerading as luxury living. Franklin filed formal challenges to every mineral rights transfer in the consortium's portfolio, demanding proof of proper conveyance and environmental compliance. His legal strategy was beautiful in its simplicity. Force them to prove they had rights they'd never actually acquired. We installed a security system around the campground that would make Fort Knox jealous. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, and communication equipment that let us coordinate with allies across the county. If Cordelia wanted to escalate to physical intimidation, we'd document every second of it. Knowledge nugget time. Corporate shell companies must disclose beneficial ownership under Treasury Department regulations enacted in 2021. The takeaway? When fighting corporate bullies, follow the money trail. Hiding behind shell companies is harder than it used to be. Community organizing became my secret weapon. I organized a Save Pine Ridge meeting that packed the community center beyond fire code limits. Local environmental groups, historical society members, tourism board representatives, and small business owners united around a common enemy: outside money trying to destroy our way of life. "Folks," I told the crowd, "this isn't just about my campground. It's about whether our community controls its own future, or whether some pharmaceutical heiress gets to strip mine our children's inheritance." The social media campaign exploded organically. Save Pine Ridge started trending across North Carolina as people shared their own stories of corporate harassment and property rights violations. Maya's environmental documentation went viral, showing the stark contrast between my family's conservation efforts and Cordelia's ecological destruction. Strategic timing became crucial. We planned our revelation for peak tourist season when maximum people would witness Cordelia's downfall. Local media contacts promised investigative coverage, state legislators agreed to attend our public presentation, and environmental groups coordinated rallies to coincide with our legal filing. Late nights in Franklin's office felt like planning D-Day, surrounded by law books, environmental reports, and financial documents that would bury Cordelia's consortium under an avalanche of evidence. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with old leather law books while we refined our strategy for maximum impact. "Gentlemen," Franklin said during one of our midnight planning sessions, "we're not just fighting for this campground, we're setting precedent for every small property owner who's ever been bullied by big money. Time to show Cordelia what happens when you pick a fight with people who actually know how to fight back." May 2024 brought warmer weather, blooming dogwoods, and Cordelia's consortium realizing their timeline was circling the drain faster than water in a broken septic tank. When big money feels cornered, it doesn't get more reasonable. It gets desperate. The sabotage started small and escalated like a bad rash. First, our main water pump developed mysterious electrical problems that required a $2,200 repair. Then our access road got accidentally damaged by construction equipment that wasn't supposed to be anywhere near our property. Anonymous complaints flooded state agencies about campground safety violations that didn't exist, each one requiring expensive inspections and legal responses. But here's the thing about installing a security system that could spot a mosquito at 50 yards. You catch people doing stupid things in high definition. My cameras captured everything. Employees from Cordelia's maintenance company, cutting our electrical lines at 3 a.m., deliberately damaging our road with a backhoe, and dumping motor oil near our water intake to frame us for environmental violations. Rodriguez helped identify the perpetrators from his time working security, same guys who'd been intimidating my guests for months. Ezra, Rodriguez said, reviewing footage on my laptop, that's Tommy Castellanos with the wire cutters. He bragged about making $50 every time he created problems for your operation. I shared the evidence with the state attorney general's fraud investigation unit, which had been quietly building a case against extraction industry corruption across 3 counties. Apparently, Cordelia's consortium wasn't the first group to use intimidation and sabotage against rural property owners. That's when Cordelia made her biggest mistake yet. She tried to buy me off. She showed up at my campground on a Tuesday morning wearing a smile that looked like it had been painted on with nail polish. Her BMW gleamed in the sunlight like a chrome coffin as she climbed out carrying a manila envelope thick enough to choke a horse. "Mr. Blackwood," she said sweetly, "I think it's time we resolved our little misunderstanding like civilized adults." Little misunderstanding, like calling World War II a minor disagreement. "Mrs. Whitmore," I replied, gesturing to the picnic table where this whole mess started, "I'm all ears." The offer was $2 million cash for my campground, more than double what the property was worth on paper. She made it sound like she was doing me the favor of a lifetime, complete with promises about creating hundreds of jobs for the local economy through her consortium's development projects. What she didn't know was that I'd learned to record conversations during my military intelligence training, and my phone was capturing every word of her confession. "The truth is, Mr. Blackwood," she said, leaning forward like we were sharing state secrets, "this area has tremendous potential for energy development. My partners have already invested heavily in geological surveys and regulatory preparation. We simply need cooperation from existing landowners to move forward." "Cooperation," I repeated. "Is that what you call bribing county officials and sabotaging my equipment?" Her smile flickered like a light bulb with loose wiring. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Of course not. Just like you don't know about the $50,000 you gave Commissioner Hayes, or the payments to rush your development permits, or instructing your security team to damage my property." The color drained from her face faster than water from a punctured canoe. But Cordelia had gotten this far by being ruthless, and cornered animals are always dangerous. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that raised every hair on my neck, "I think you should carefully consider my offer. Sometimes problems can disappear if people are reasonable. Sometimes they get much worse if people aren't." That's the moment Cordelia crossed the line from civil harassment to criminal intimidation. And thanks to North Carolina's one-party consent law, I had every threatening word recorded in crystal-clear digital audio. Here's another knowledge nugget. In one-party consent states, you can legally record conversations without the other person's knowledge as long as you're part of the conversation. The takeaway? When dealing with bullies, documentation is your best friend, and sometimes your only witness. After she left, I immediately called Franklin Morse and the state attorney general's office. The recording was pure gold for prosecutors building RICO cases against the consortium. Cordelia had just admitted to bribery, conspiracy, and made threats that qualified as criminal intimidation under federal law. But the best part was yet to come. Charlie Henderson's financial investigation had uncovered a web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and fraudulent environmental assessments that violated everything from tax law to international banking regulations. The IRS, FBI, and EPA were all building cases that would put Cordelia's entire operation in federal prison. Maya burst into the cabin that evening with news that made my day complete. "Dad, the state environmental agency just announced they're launching a criminal investigation into Lakeside Estates. Our water quality data is being used as evidence for prosecution." As I watched the sunset paint our lake gold, I realized Cordelia had given me everything I needed to destroy her completely. All that was left was choosing the perfect moment to detonate her entire world. June 2024 arrived like the final round of a boxing match where one fighter doesn't know they're already bleeding. Cordelia's consortium was hemorrhaging money, facing federal investigations and watching their timeline collapse, but they still had one card left to play: political pressure at the state level. Governor's office started receiving urgent concerns about environmental violations at Pine Ridge Campground. Somehow Cordelia had convinced someone in Raleigh that my family's 70-year-old operation was a clear and present danger to North Carolina's pristine watersheds. The irony was thick enough to cut with a chainsaw. State Environmental Agency announced a surprise inspection for the following Tuesday, complete with media notification and enough fanfare to make you think they were investigating a nuclear meltdown instead of a campground that had been operating cleanly since Eisenhower was president. The inspector they sent was a guy named Davidson who had more conflicts of interest than a politician's voting record. Charlie Henderson's research showed Davidson owned stock in 3 different extraction companies and had previously worked as a consultant for Cordelia's consortium. This wasn't an inspection, it was a setup. But here's what Cordelia didn't count on. I'd been planning for this moment since discovering her real agenda. When Davidson arrived Tuesday morning expecting to find violations he could use to shut me down, he instead walked into the most thoroughly documented environmental showcase in county history. Maya's Environmental Club had spent months turning our campground into a living laboratory. Water quality testing stations, erosion control demonstrations, wildlife habitat preservation examples, and pollution prevention systems that exceeded EPA standards by margins that made inspectors weep with joy. "Mr. Davidson," I said as he climbed out of his state vehicle, "welcome to Pine Ridge. We're excited to show you what responsible land management looks like." What I didn't mention was that I'd invited the state attorney general's investigators to observe the inspection, plus representatives from 3 environmental groups who'd been building cases against extraction industry corruption. The look on Davidson's face when he realized he was being watched by people who actually understood environmental law was better than Christmas morning. His hands started shaking as he tried to find violations that simply didn't exist. Maya stepped forward with her scientific presentation like she was defending a doctoral thesis. "Mr. Davidson, our water quality data shows contamination levels near 0 at all testing sites around the campground. However, we've documented significant pollution downstream from Lakeside Estates development." She handed him a folder thick enough to stop bullets. Photographs of illegal dumping, chemical analysis showing petroleum contamination, and documentation of habitat destruction that made Cordelia's consortium look like environmental terrorists. "This is very thorough," Davidson stammered, realizing his rigged inspection was backfiring spectacularly. That's when I played my ace card. "Mr. Davidson, while you're here, I'd like to present some documentation about mineral rights ownership in this area." I pulled out the original 1952 deed and Franklin Morse's legal analysis. "It seems there's been some confusion about who actually owns subsurface rights around Pine Lake." The mineral rights revelation hit Davidson like a freight train carrying nuclear waste. His face went through more color changes than a sunset as he realized the consortium he'd been helping had built their entire operation on land they didn't legally control. State Attorney General investigator stepped forward with a smile that could have powered a small city. "Mr. Davidson, we'd like to ask you some questions about your relationship with Appalachian Energy Consortium and any consulting work you may have performed for related companies." Within 2 hours, our environmental violation inspection had become a crime scene investigation. Davidson was answering questions about taking bribes to overlook environmental violations, while his inspection team was documenting illegal contamination at Lakeside Estates instead of my campground. The media circus was beautiful to watch. Local news cameras captured Cordelia arriving at the scene in full panic mode, her expensive legal team trailing behind like confused ducklings. She'd expected to see my campground shut down. Instead, she found state investigators seizing documents from her development office. "Mrs. Whitmore," a reporter called out, "how do you respond to allegations that your consortium bribed state officials to ignore environmental violations?" "This is a witch hunt," she screamed, her composure finally cracking like cheap paint. "These people are fabricating evidence to protect their failing business." "Ma'am," the state investigator interrupted, "we have recorded conversations and financial records documenting payments to state officials. Would you like to make a statement?" That evening, Maya and I sat on our dock watching the news coverage on her laptop. The story had exploded across social media. Pharmaceutical heiress exposed in environmental crimes conspiracy. Justice for Pine Ridge was trending nationwide. "Dad," Maya said, grinning like she'd just discovered buried treasure, "tomorrow's county commission meeting is going to be epic." She was right. Cordelia's entire world was about to collapse in the most public way possible, and half the state would be watching it happen live on television. Time for the final act. July 15th, 2024. The day Cordelia Whitmore learned what happens when you bring a knife to a gunfight with someone who owns the entire arsenal. The county commission meeting was standing room only, packed tighter than sardines in a can that someone forgot to open. Local media, regional news crews, and even a stringer from CNN filled the back of the chamber. Environmental groups had bussed in supporters from 3 counties, while property rights activists waved signs that read, "Hands off our heritage," and "Corporate bullies go home." State Attorney General representatives sat in the front row like judges at a trial, flanked by FBI agents who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else but were professionally excited about their RICO case. The air conditioning was losing the battle against 200 angry people breathing the same recycled air. Cordelia arrived 45 minutes late with a legal team that cost more per hour than most people's annual salary. She wore a navy blue suit that screamed, "Trustworthy executive," and carried herself like she still thought this was a minor setback instead of the complete destruction of her criminal enterprise. Commission Chairman Bradley called for order with a gavel that sounded like gunshots. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to address allegations concerning Lakeside Estates development permits and related environmental compliance issues. Mr. Chairman, I said, standing from my seat in the 3rd row, I'd like to present evidence relevant to these proceedings. Franklin Morse handed me the original 1952 deed like he was passing me the Holy Grail. Maya sat beside me with her environmental documentation, looking more confident than most lawyers twice her age. Commissioners, I began, my family has owned Pine Ridge Campground for 72 years. During that time, we've maintained environmental standards that exceed state and federal requirements. Today, I want to show you what responsible land stewardship looks like and contrast it with what's been happening next door. The projector screen lit up with Maya's water quality data, side-by-side comparisons that made Lakeside Estates look like an environmental crime scene. Gasps echoed through the chamber as photos showed illegal dumping, contaminated runoff, and habitat destruction. This is all very interesting, Cordelia interrupted, standing with the confidence of someone who still thought money could solve everything. But these are clearly fabricated attacks on a legitimate business enterprise that's brought jobs and tax revenue to this community. That's when I smiled and pulled out my phone. Mrs. Whitmore, I'd like to play a recording from our conversation last month. Her face went pale faster than milk left in the sun as her own voice filled the chamber. I've paid good money to make sure those permits go through quickly. Sometimes problems can disappear if people are reasonable. Sometimes they get much worse if people aren't. The silence was so complete you could hear people's phones buzzing with incoming social media notifications. Even the news cameras seemed to lean forward, sensing the kill shot coming. That's taken completely out of context, Cordelia stammered, but her voice cracked like a teenager lying about homework. Ma'am, said Agent Morrison from the FBI, standing slowly like a predator who'd been waiting all day for this moment. I'm going to need you to remain in the chamber. We have some questions about federal racketeering charges. But the best was yet to come. Commissioners, I continued, pulling out the deed that would end this forever, there's one more thing Mrs. Whitmore doesn't know about her development project. Franklin Morse stepped forward with his magnifying glass and the original 1952 mineral rights documentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present evidence that Mr. Blackwood's family owns all mineral rights within a 2-mile radius of Pine Lake, including the entire footprint of Lakeside Estates. The chamber erupted like a volcano. Cordelia's face went through more expressions than a silent movie actor as she realized her entire extraction operation had been built on land she didn't legally control. Your Honor, Cordelia's lead attorney said desperately, we need time to examine these documents. You've had 70 years, I interrupted. My grandfather filed these rights properly in 1952. Your client built her entire criminal conspiracy on minerals that belong to my family. State Attorney General Representative Williams stood up with a smile that could power the entire county. Mrs. Whitmore, based on evidence presented today and our ongoing investigation, you're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery of public officials, environmental crimes, and violation of federal racketeering statutes. The handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the chamber like the final note of a symphony. News cameras captured every second as Cordelia Whitmore, pharmaceutical heiress, environmental criminal, and would-be land thief, was led away in custody. Commissioner Bradley banged his gavel for order. The Commission votes unanimously to revoke all permits associated with the Appalachian Energy Consortium and to refer this matter for federal prosecution. Standing ovation. 200 people on their feet, applauding justice served with a side of poetic irony. Outside, Maya hugged me tight as news crews captured our victory. "Dad," she whispered, "Mom would be so proud." She was right. Sarah would have loved seeing David beat Goliath with nothing but truth, determination, and 70-year-old paperwork. August 2024 brought justice served colder than sweet tea on a summer afternoon, and sweeter than Maya's grandmother's peach cobbler. Cordelia Whitmore pled guilty to federal racketeering, bribery, and environmental crimes in exchange for 18 months in minimum security prison and $2.8 million in fines. Her Appalachian Energy Consortium collapsed faster than a house of cards in a hurricane, with her partners racing to cut deals with federal prosecutors. The best part? Her mineral rights speculation had cost investors over $20 million in a scheme that was doomed from the day my grandfather signed that deed in 1952. Inspector Davidson got 3 years for taking bribes and falsifying environmental reports. Commissioner Hayes resigned in disgrace after the FBI found a paper trail of corruption that read like a how-to manual for political grift. Turns out when you shine a light on cockroaches, they scatter in all directions. But here's where this story gets really good, the part that would make Sarah smile from wherever she's watching. I used the mineral rights revenue to transform Pine Ridge into something special. We built an environmental education center in Sarah's memory, complete with Maya's water quality laboratory and interactive exhibits that teach kids about conservation. The old campground became a model for sustainable tourism that environmental groups use as an example of how to do things right. Maya got accepted to Duke's environmental law program with a full scholarship funded by her high school research project. The girl who started testing lake water to help her dad fight an HOA bully ended up with a calling that'll let her protect places like Pine Ridge for the rest of her life. Attorney Franklin Morse retired as the local hero who took down big money with old-fashioned legal work and a magnifying glass. The man's 83 years old and still gets standing ovations when he walks into the diner. The Pine Ridge Environmental Foundation now manages a $5 million endowment that funds habitat restoration around the entire lake. We've got scholarship programs for local kids studying environmental science, annual festivals that celebrate rural conservation, and enough ongoing revenue to keep this place pristine for Maya's grandchildren. Even better? The new Lakeside Estates HOA leadership came to me hat in hand, apologizing for Cordelia's harassment and asking how they could contribute to environmental restoration. Turns out when you remove the cancer, healthy tissue can grow back. We've got community gardens now, joint conservation projects, and former enemies working together to protect what we all love about this place. The legal precedent we set is being studied in law schools across the country. The Pine Ridge Act passed by our state legislature requires full disclosure of mineral rights ownership before any extraction permits can be issued. Federal environmental crimes task forces use our case as a template for investigating corporate land-grabbing schemes. Here's your final knowledge nugget. Property deeds from before 1960 often contain rights and protections that modern developers don't expect to encounter. The takeaway? Never assume the quiet neighbor doesn't know exactly what they own. Sometimes the old paperwork is worth more than the new money. I still start every morning with coffee on the same dock where this whole mess began, but now instead of worrying about property taxes, I'm planning conservation projects and watching Maya's environmental students collect water samples for their research. The lake is cleaner than it's been in decades, the wildlife population is thriving, and families from 5 states drive here specifically because we proved you can run a business without destroying what makes a place special. Last week, a documentary crew from the Nature Channel finished filming our story for a series about communities fighting corporate environmental destruction. Maya's already planning her next project, helping other rural families protect their mineral rights from extraction industry bullies. The best moment came 6 months after Cordelia's sentencing, when a busload of kids from Charlotte arrived for our summer environmental camp. One little girl asked Maya why the water was so clear she could see fish swimming 20 feet down. "Because," Maya said, grinning like her mother used to, "sometimes when people try to take something beautiful away from you, you discover you're stronger than you knew." That's exactly what Sarah would have said. So here's my challenge to you. Drop a comment and share your HOA horror story, because I guarantee someone watching right now is dealing with their own Cordelia and they need to know they're not alone in this fight. And hit that subscribe button because next week I'm telling you about the Texas rancher who discovered his neighbor's entire subdivision was built on stolen land. Trust me, you won't want to miss that one.
That's a wrap for today's episode on HOA Stories. If you enjoyed watching Karma in action, smash that like button, comment your thoughts, and let us know if you've dealt with HOA madness too. Subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA meltdown we post.